just going to get out of the way so Dr. Upshaw can dazzle us. So thank you, Dr. Upshaw.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. So hello, everybody. And I know that you've been enjoying the conference as much as I have. Everything has been wonderful. So kudos to the planners and organizers. Just have to say that right away. So I am presenting this program from Tuscaloosa on the unceded land of the Muskogee tribe of peoples. And I'd like to welcome us into this space. And so if you will mute yourselves, but if you will follow my direction. So I don't know if you're familiar with call and response in the African American community. So I am going to give a call, and when I point to you, you're going to give a response. And you don't have to turn on your mic or anything. You can sing if you want to, or you can just talk it. So I'm going to say, how do you do, my neighbors? How do you do? And when I point to you, I want you to say, how do you do, right where you are. So anytime I point to you, you say, how do you do? Here we go. How do you do, my neighbors? How do you do? How do you do, my neighbors? How do you do? I didn't come to worry your patience. I just came to share some information. How do you do, my neighbors? How do you do? All right, so now we're building community here, right? So how do you do? We are all neighbors, right? There's a proverb that states, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And it's my hope today that our interactions will sharpen us as we journey together toward allyship. I want to start off with a little bit of information and background about myself. So my mother and I lived with my grandmother when I was growing up. I remember cooking with my grandmother. She was called Big Ma, just as a reference point. So I remember singing with Big Ma and listening to her sing as she worked around the house. How many of you remember your grandparents? Well, my mother also remembers her grandfather, and she talks about him all the time and tells stories about her interactions with him. And I remember my grandmother talking about her grandfather too, Grandpa Jim. Now, I was last year's day old, okay, when I put two and two together, and I realized that my mother's memories of her grandfather are the memories of a man who was the child of a slave. He was born in 1868. And my grandmother's memories of her grandfather were memories of a man who was actually an enslaved person. Now, I didn't know any of these men personally, but I know them through the living memories of my mama and my grandmama. And the first thing I'd like to take time to do today, this is important, to talk about how we position our understanding of allyship. And I'd like to place that understanding on an African time continuum that was shared in the 70s by Dr. John Mbidi. And he talked about Zasa time. And Zasa time includes people who passed on but are still intimately known by the living, like my grandmother. Intimately known by the living is Zasa time. And Zamani time includes those who passed on but who are not intimately known by the living, like my grandpa Jim. I know him, but not intimately, right? And it's important to understand because in discussions of race and allyship, usually white people begin the discussion in Zasa time. I didn't own slaves and I don't know anyone who did. While Black people tend to begin the discussion in Zamani time. I know the stories of my ancestors, even if I don't know their names, and they are living to me in that way. And so I'm asking you to keep this starting point in mind as you listen to this edited version of a speech called A Black Woman Speaks. And it was written by Beah Richards, who was an actress and an activist. It is right that I, a woman, Black, should speak of white womanhood. My husbands, my fathers, my brothers, my sons died for it, because of it. and their blood chilled in electric chairs, stopped by hangman's noose, cooked by lynch mob's fire, spilled by white supremacists' desire to kill for profit, gives me that right. I would that I could speak of white womanhood as it will and should be, when it stands tall in full equality, but then womanhood would be womanhood, void of color and class, and all necessity for my speaking thus would be past, gladly past. But now, as it is deemed a thing apart, supreme, I must in searching honesty report how it seems to me. White womanhood stands in bloodied skirt and in slavery, reaching out adulterous hands, killing mine and crushing me. What then is the superior thing that in order to be sustained must needs feed upon my flesh? How came this horror to be? Well, let's look to history. They said, the white supremacists said, that you were better than me, that your fair brow would never know the sweat of slavery. But they lied. White womanhood too is enslaved. The difference is degree. They brought me here in chains. They brought you here, willing slaves to man, you, shiploads of women, each filled with hope that she might win with ruby lip and saucy curl and bright and flashing eye, him to wife who had the largest tender, remember? And they sold you here, even as they sold me. My sisters, there is no room for mockery. If they counted my teeth, they did appraise your thigh. Sold you to the highest bidder, the same as I, and you did not fight for your right to choose whom you would wed. But for whatever bartered price that was the legal tender, you were sold to a stranger's bed in a stranger land, remember? And you did not fight. Mind you, I speak not mockingly, but I fought for freedom. I'm fighting now for our unity. We are women all, and what wrongs you murders me and eventually marks your grave. So we share a mutual death at the hand of tyranny. They trapped me with chains and the gun. They trapped you with lying tongue, for lest you see the fault, that villainy that robbed you of name, voice, and authority, that murderous greed that wasted you and me. He, the white supremacist, fixed your minds with a poisonous thought. White skin is supreme. And therewith wrought that monstrous change, exiling you to things. And you did not fight, but set your minds fast on my slavery, the better to endure your own. It's true. My pearls were beads of sweat wrung from weary body's pain. Instead of rings on my hands, I wore swollen, bursting veins. My ornaments were the whiplash's scar, my diamond perhaps a tear. Instead of paint and powder on my face, I wore a solid mask of fear to see my blood so spilled. And you, women, seeing, spoke no protest, but cuddled down in your pink slavery and thought somehow that my wasted blood confirmed your superiority. Because your necklace was of gold, you did not notice that it throttled speech. Because diamond rings bedecked your hands, you didn't protest their dictated idleness. Nor could you see that the platinum bracelets which graced your wrists were chains, binding you to economic slavery. He purchased you. He raped me. I fought. But you fought neither for yourselves nor me, sat trapped in your superiority and spoke no reproach. Consoled your outrage with an added brooch. Oh God, how great is a woman's fear, who for a stone, a cold stone would not defend honor, love, nor dignity. You bore the shaming mockery of your marriage and heaped your hate on me, a woman too, a slave more so. Understand, I was not your enemy in this. I was not the cause of your distress. I was your friend. I fought. But you would not fight with me. Thinking you aided only me, your deceived eyes seeing only my slavery aided your own decay. I would that the poor among you could have seen through the scheme and joined hands with me. Then we, being the majority, could long ago have rescued our wasted lives. What will you do? Will you fight with me? White supremacy is your enemy and mine. So be careful when you talk to me. Remind me not of my own slavery. I know it well. Rather, tell me of your own. Remember, you have never known me. You've only been seeing me as white supremacy would have me be, but I will be myself. If you will fight with me, then take my hand. Take my hand that our land may become at last to be a place of peace and human equality. If you would take a moment, I'd like you to gather your thoughts, and in groups of 3, just ideas or feelings that you have in listening to what was said, and put that in the chat for me, in groups of 3. So words or phrases, whatever is coming to your mind right now, just jot that down in the chat for me. Now, just so you know, this is interactive, so you can turn your mics on because we're gonna talk, y'all. I have questions for you. And I'd like to start with this one. While you please feel free to go ahead and put whatever you want to in the chat as we go forward. But the first question is, Dr. Yolanda Seeley Ruiz speaks of an archaeology of self. And so I'd like to ask you how you think this archaeology of self might be applied to the journey of becoming an ally. Feel free to unmute yourself and share. Again, the question is, how can an archaeology of self, a term used by Dr. Yolanda Seeley Ruiz, how can an archaeology of self be applied to the journey of becoming an ally?
So I'm not familiar with her work, but I would think that if you're not true to who you are and aren't true within yourself, then you can't be an ally to anyone else because you have too much internal work to do on yourself.
Wow.
Yeah, just to echo that, I mean, I think that in order to be an ally, like in the racial justice context, you have to be honest about the way that you've been socially conditioned, right? And the way you've internalized that social conditioning. And so that's like some deep internal work, right? And archaeology is like digging, you know, and that kind of excavation. And that involves, you know, a pretty, I think, serious self-reflection. So in order to not be in denial, you know, you have to confess.
Well, I was having this conversation with another group, and one of the things we talked about was excavation. And so I don't know anything about archaeology, but whenever I see them, you know, in the movies, like they're always with that little brush and they're gently brushing off a little bit at a time. They're not jumping in with a bulldozer and moving things out of the way, because what you're doing is looking for something precious. And I would suggest that even as we are excavating ourselves to get to know ourselves, that we be gentle and that we use that brush and that we not try to do these huge blocks of self, but that it's a little bit at a time so that we can focus on the details so we don't inadvertently break something that's precious. Anybody else want to share? Yes, Joe.
Hey, I interpreted that as the archaeology of self. If you're like, I just interpreted it as like empathy and becoming an ally comes from within, and you could, if you look inside yourself, you can find common ground with anyone, really.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Anybody else? We can come back to it. So if you have some thoughts, you can welcome to put it in the chat. But also, let's just to keep the ball rolling. So Ubuntu is a South African principle, roughly translated as I am because we are. So how could we apply that idea, I am because we are, to this idea of allyship? What might that look like?
I think, Dr. Upshaw, that speaks to, I think your point about excavation requires an ethic of care and preciousness, of looking for what's beautiful but discarded, as well as what needs to get out of the way. I think really dovetails so beautifully with that I am because we are, right? What is it that I might bring to the table that is useful or valuable? What can I contribute rather than, yeah, what can I contribute? I think is a beautiful part of that work.
I like that. Anybody else care to share?
I second off of what I think Debbie just said. And I definitely think that that emphasizes the importance of empathy. And once you understand somebody's situation, it's easier to fight with them and want to help them get justice for something that affects them because you feel personally connected to their experiences.
Yeah, and the idea that finding value in someone else is finding value in myself. And so when we are disrespectful, when the group is disrespected, the self is disrespected, right? So that it really ties us all together. Ally comes from the word alligare, and it means to bind. And to be bound to something is not a loose connection. It's not a pinky finger holds, right? To be bound to somebody implies that it is a tight bonding, a cord, even a tightness. And to be intimately tied to somebody and their experience doesn't allow for that bond to be easily broken. So I think that's something to consider about our journey on allyship. Anybody else? Let me see what we have in the chat. Someone said that what happens in another time and place matters to us here and now. I think Jen said that, yes? Yes. Anybody else care to share? So I think of allyship as a journey. And I think of it not only as a journey for white people to be an ally to me, but realizing that I, as a person of color, as a Black woman, can also be an ally and be on the journey to allyship for other groups. I am able-bodied, so I can be an ally to the disabled community. I can be an ally to the LGBTQA plus community. I can be an ally, so I have to do this same type of self-excavation that I'm asking for others who want to ally with me. I find myself that having to do that same work. Okay. So when taking a journey, being prepared is often about as much about what you leave behind as it is about what you take. So on your journey towards allyship, what have you found essential to both keep and to leave behind? Dana, yes, being prepared involves knowing what to keep and what to leave behind. And Addie said, I found it essential to leave behind my ego. Yes. Emily, I try to move away from individualism. It's very important. Excuse me, y'all. My mama just came in. Mama, I'm working. Sorry, Mama's 91, so she's determined that wanting a cup of coffee is more important than me finishing my presentation. Later, Mama. Later. Yes, they would, Mom. She said, y'all wouldn't mind. They wouldn't mind.
I heard that.
We would not. Mama is 91.
You
She deserves
can't.
coffee.
Hey, yeah, go grab her.
Serve her a cup of coffee.
She does not need an extra cup of coffee. Trust me. She has been drinking coffee all day.
Well, she deserves that acknowledgement, because we love the mamas, because that's what we're about, right?
Absolutely. She's a mess though. We have a rule: if the door is closed, she's supposed to come in and leave and be quiet, because I know what she wants, right? But then she'll just kind of stand there because she knows I have to say something to her.
But Dr. Upshot, does she really just want to get on camera? That's what Dana said.
Oh Lord, she probably would, but then she'd say, "Oh no, Lord have mercy! I don't look, and I missed it. Those people can see me." So it would be a whole different. She's fine. She's fine, but I thank y'all for the concern. She's a mess, but yeah, she'll be 91 in May. So she thinks she tells me that she's the baby now. And I said, no, because if you were the baby, you would be in timeout and get whoopings all the time. And since you can't do that, then you were not the baby. But we were talking about what is essential on this journey to allyship. What do we need to keep? What do we need to leave behind? Because we can't take everything. Now, I'm just going to be honest. So I hate flying, not because I'm afraid of flying, but because I can't pack all my shoes. And so I have to have, I want to match, and I need to know, like, is it wintertime? Can I wear my cute boots, or do I really need those boots that are going to get me through snow? And can I wear my heels? Am I going to be walking a lot? Do I need flats? And you just have to be prepared. And I can do that when I drive. So probably if this conference had been face-to-face, I would have driven so that I could throw everything in the back seat. It would have been cheaper to fly, but I couldn't bring everything with me. I could have gone faster, but I would rather, I'm a driver, so I love driving. I love seeing places, and I stop by and see friends, but the journey is what's important to me. Not necessarily I enjoy the destination, but the journey is important. And how many of us are journeying in a way, are we taking things, is it an enjoyable trip? we're learning a lot, but is it enjoyable? Is it something that we want to bring other people along with us? Or is it something that is a journey that is shameful? Is it just painful? What is it? How could you describe your journey toward allyship?
I think earlier someone quoted Audre Lorde with the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And so as allies, I think we need to leave the master's tools behind and recognize that we need to maybe start from scratch and create new tools, because clearly those tools haven't served any of us very well, but the master.
Wow, that's amazing. So what does that even look like, to create new tools? We're so used to using the tools that are given to us and laid out. Can you imagine going to a carpenter and saying, you can't use a hammer. I need you to think of something else that will function like this, but we don't use hammers anymore. We don't use saws anymore. We are so used to using the tools that we have that it can be very difficult to even imagine something outside of what we know. And even when we know that what we're using does us a disservice. Isn't that something to think about? We can know that those tools aren't working and still be unwilling sometimes to think about what new tools might be used, or unwilling to think about the circumstances, sometimes even unwilling to be inconvenienced. Because it's inconvenience if I can't just pick up the hammer and the saw. I mean, I know it'll do the job, but it'll do something that I want done. But at least I can just run over to the store and just grab one and take it out. How does that play into this role of ally?
Not to hog the conversation, but I think it puts the ally and the individuals they are trying to be an ally to support all on the same equal footing. So it's not the ally swooping in with the tools saying, I know how to fix this situation. It's we've all got to come together collaboratively and figure out how do we begin to address these issues. And we have to do it with the same knowledge and the same amount of input. And we're going to fall on our butts many times, but we fall together.
Mhm. And I think for me, and I'm sitting here and I'm going back into my social scientist brain as a trained sociologist, and I'm thinking about the research methods that we use and how those are so ingrained in us. And Angela and I were talking about that this morning in our session. It's just so ingrained in us that we use these methods, even though these methods are harmful because they don't actually capture the real voices of who we are. So then we go outside of those traditional canons and we use these other methods that we claim as ours. And it's often our allies that we have to look at to say, okay, we're gonna accept this paper, although it's not a traditional method, but we're gonna support you in moving things in a different direction or in a way that supports other, these not, I want to get it right, these under-recognized voices. And so my allyship is going to allow for me to support them by publishing this or asking this person to be a keynote to talk about their work in this audience that traditionally wouldn't think to have this person, or in this journal that wouldn't traditionally think to publish this paper.
Absolutely. Sequoia says, and I think about the risk involved in utilizing, developing those new tools. It requires the willingness to imagine and reach that can be quite vulnerable. So true. Being an ally without the master's tools forces us to ask, what do you need? Rather than this is what I'm going to do for you or give to you. And to leave the divide and conquer strategy behind and keep our deep capacity for empathy and love. I like that. I like that. I have one more question and then I'll open it up and you can ask me anything, right? But I have this one question. So this is a question I've been struggling with. And so I don't want to struggle by myself. So I'm going to throw it out to you guys so we can struggle together. Okay. Because I like to do everything in community. I'm an only child, but I like community. Struggle is good. Okay. So when you belong to a more marginalized group, there's a cost involved. It can cost you in fair housing practices or unfair housing practices. It can cost you in promotions. It costs, right? And so to be bound to, remember we were talking about an ally as bound, to be bound to a marginalized group is to be bound in that cost. And we're not talking monetary, but to be bound, it costs something to be a true ally. And so my question is, have you counted the cost at which you are willing or unwilling to live in allyship? And so let me see if I can explain this question a little more. So think of it as, have you set up your boundaries? So before something happens, before there is the big emotional moment where you have to make a quick decision, have you made the decision of what you're going to do? Have you decided how far you will travel down this road? Where do you stop? What things are you unwilling to sacrifice? So for instance, some allies in this journey, right, might be at a certificate level. They may be starting off where they are just reading books and they're gathering information. They're young in their journey, right? Very new, wet behind the ears, if you want to call it that, right? But still just learning. You might have somebody at a bronze level. That means that they know a little bit and they're willing, they've decided that if Aunt Sue says something racist at the dinner table on Thanksgiving, I'm gonna call her on it. And I'm gonna run the risk of not being invited back for Christmas dinner or not being invited back to the birthday parties or have my children not be involved with the life of their cousins because I'm going to call this out at the family gatherings. They may be there. Somebody may be willing to sacrifice a promotion, say the departmental meeting where things are not going well and you speak up and you draw the ire of the department chair and they've been talking to you about that promotion that you really, really want, but you can't allow this situation to go unanswered. You feel that you have to speak up there and you run the risk of loss in that, of paying that cost. You might be at the level where you are at a rally and there's a possibility of being arrested. What I'm saying is, have you made the choice before you go to the rally that it's okay, I've got bond money set aside, my kids are taken care of, or have you thought about that? What happens if you're arrested? Are you a single parent? Is your child at home alone? Are you running a risk not only for yourself, but for your children? Have you counted the cost? And I ask because when I started doing this archaeology of self, and this only been a couple of months, but I had to think about what was happening in my own life. And it's not a story that I'm particularly proud of, but I'm an autoethnographer, so I tell all my stuff. Okay, so I just tell stuff. When Colin Kaepernick was kneeling, a friend of mine sent me a jersey. Now I live in a football town. Tuscaloosa is a football town. And so I decided I was going to wear my jersey because I believed in what Kaepernick was saying and doing, and it was fun. And I wore my shirt, my jersey to Walmart, and I got funny looks. Nobody said anything to me, but I got funny looks. And I started to feel uncomfortable. And I got more and more uncomfortable as I was out. And I realized that I was wearing a shirt that, well, I believed in it, but I wasn't committed to it, because I realized that things could have escalated quite easily because people are not civil to one another these days. And someone could have said something to me. They could have been more than rude. It could have been a physical thing. And my ultimate responsibility was to get back home to my mom. That was my priority. And I've never worn that shirt again because I felt so uncomfortable. But I realized that my wearing that shirt said something that I wasn't sure that I even knew the depths, because at that time people were horrified that he was kneeling, and it was awful. And people, it was such a, I mean, we've had so much happen since then that looks like, you know, a kid party. But at the time it was so unconceivable, and people had such definite feelings about it. And I realized that I had put myself in the fight, and I hadn't counted the cost of what could possibly happen. What if someone said something to me and we got into a verbal altercation and the police were called, and what, I live in Alabama, would I have been believed? What, I had not counted the cost. So if allyship costs something, have you made those decisions? Have you thought about it? About where your boundaries need to lie? And it's okay to say no. I'm just asking.
I actually did think about that, but I didn't think about it in that context, I don't think. During the Black Lives Matter movements, I didn't go because of COVID and the fear of bringing COVID back home to my asthmatic child, and not knowing what that could mean. Although most of those marches were, all of those marches were outside, I still wasn't comfortable risking that because of my child. And I don't know that I thought about it in terms of, you know, the allyship. I think I thought about it in terms of just being a mom,
Mm-hmm.
and mothering, and that, you know, not wanting to, you know, do anything to risk, you know, my 7-year-old. So I wonder if sometimes the end result is it being about allyship, but it always doesn't start, those choices aren't always in the forefront initially about the allyship, but about the other things. So Dr. Upshaw, you talked about your mom and caring for her. Was that, okay, caring for my mom, oh, I can't do this, I'm not gonna make this choice to wear this jersey anymore because I don't wanna risk something happening and I can't be there for my mom. Does that kind of make sense?
Absolutely, because I wasn't thinking, it wasn't until I started started thinking about the cost of allyship that story even came back to me, because I had kind of put it out of my head. I look at that jersey all the time and I put it away. And I never think about it until I thought about it. And I thought, I need to really look at, why didn't I wear that shirt anymore? I mean, we are certainly long past where that's even an issue anymore. We've had so much, again, so much to happen that people aren't even thinking about that anymore. But it was just very, there are a couple of things that have happened that I've had to think about. If this impacts me negatively, then it impacts my mother negatively. And so how do there are choices that I can't make anymore. She was fine and living by herself, I could get up in the middle of the night and go to the grocery store at 3 o'clock in the morning and didn't think about anything except I don't want to be in Walmart when there's a lot of people. I'll go at 3 o'clock in the morning and it'll be fine. But now I think, well, what if she wakes up and I'm gone? What if something happens to me while I'm out there at 3 o'clock in the morning? It'll be a flat tire. I might not make it back, or there could be an accident, something. There's something else now that is helping me establish boundaries. And so it doesn't always have to do with allyship, but I know that there are certain things that I can't, that are more prevalent in my thinking now. And let's see what we have in the chat. I'm not going to seek an academic career. This is Jason. When I get my PhD, because we do not need any more old white male professors. My history department has an all-white faculty and I want to do my part with my employment choices. And Angela said that those distinctions are so important because I've been guilty of expecting allies to meet me where I want them to be rather than where they are mentally and spiritually. I've learned that everyone can't be radical allies. Some folks are anonymous allies who cut checks for the cause, and that's okay. Everyone has a role. So true. So true. We all have a role. We have a role too. In the marginalized communities that we belong to, we have roles to play, and we don't all, I'm not a marcher. I never have been. You know, my mom was in Montgomery when they started planning for the bus boycott. And she used to remember, and she would tell us that they told them that if they participated in the boycott or it went to those meetings, those planning meetings, that they would lose their job. And she made a decision. She had to take care of her mother, so she didn't go. People make choices all the time. So we have to, and we don't always know the whys. So those were my questions for us. So I'm open to hearing questions from you guys. Thank you for answering those with me. Questions?
Dr. Upshaw, that was a really incredible conversation that you just facilitated. I just want to thank you. And I also wanted to think about the term ally. You know, I know a lot of people use other terms or kind of have a kind of scale where ally might be the more, you know, passive or sort of, you know, opting in and opting out, where like accomplice or co-conspirator, you know, is sort of like always in on the mission. So I was just wondering for you, like, you know, is ally the term that you find has the most utility, or if you had any thoughts about that?
So I have a partner and we do diversity facilitation, and we've been talking about this very thing. And it's like, you know, it's almost like every discipline has a way of saying something. It means very similar things, but if you're in the social sciences versus in the hard sciences, you may be talking about the same thing, but you keep missing each other because I call it tomato and you call it tomato, and we never understand each other, you know? So I understand the value in what they're trying to bring with that word, because ally in a lot of ways has been overused. I haven't made the switch completely because at this point, I just haven't. I think I think that there will always be a new term There will always be a new term. There will always be a new way, because people are critical thinkers and they are thinking through these things. And next year, you know, it'll be something new. So somebody else will have had a thought and said, well, wait a minute, this doesn't quite fit the solution. But for me right now, the term ally is something that most people recognize regardless of their field of discipline. And so that I try to remember, let me see how I can say this. I try to remember that I want all my work to be accessible by people who are not in the academy. And everybody does not read about anti-racism and abolitionists and co-conspirators. They're not reading those books, but they do understand the basics of what an ally is or isn't. So if I say that word to the general public, they would know that. So I always try to remember that it's really important. I don't have to use the 12-syllable words. I know that I have that in my vocabulary, but on an everyday basis, I want to be understood by the people who helped me get here. So I try to make sure that I'm using terminology that is understood by the majority of the folks rather than a narrow margin. I hope that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anybody else have questions? Anybody want to share an idea?
I have comments I'd like to share.
Please.
I appreciated hearing your Colin Kaepernick story. I've got one. I was asked to be a panelist at a PWI for Black Student Association event, and the topic was, it was never about the flag. And two of the professors who were invited to speak were had former careers in criminal justice. I think one is a police officer and the other is something else like that. And of course, they felt self-righteous about saying that, this is something against the flag, blah, blah, blah. And when I did my presentation, I said, everyone has an opinion about what he did, but how many people even asked him what he did and why he did it? And and I looked at an interview which he did where he had talked to a colleague and who suggested kneeling as a form of prayer, as opposed to staying in the, staying in whatever they call the place where they, like change clothes and everything, or, which he had done before, or just sitting in the chair, which he'd done before. And also he had kneeled before, but no one had really paid much attention to it until this one particular time. So these two individuals, after it was over, were going around saying very negative things about me. And some of the students were extremely upset, and the president of the university was there, and they told them that they needed to apologize. And the person who was pretty much the coordinator of it, one of those professors was in her department, and I think he might have even been the chair of her department. And so she calls me and she says, well, they have apologized, and they said that you went over on one of your time frames to talk. And I said, yes, I did, because I addressed everything I was told to address. And it took long in order to do that. However, on the next segment, I went under. But she was wanting me to apologize, because they said I needed to apologize. And I was not apologizing for anything, because I just did what I was asked to do. You invited me here. I did I fulfilled, your requests, and I wasn't going around bad mouthing anyone. So, why are you asking me to apologize? And when you talk about boundaries, when I was younger, my boundaries were extremely clear. If it didn't work, I'm gone. Then I realized it's probably better not to leave a job until you have a job. So I would be a lot more strategic. And then later, I said my boundaries for dealing with, an abusive work environment is if I have something to learn or if I have something I can teach to others, then it's worth it for me to endure. So for me, my boundaries change, like throughout, throughout my life and for different reasons. And especially when you have family, you've got to address the needs of your family before you address the needs of anything else. So um, I don't think you'll ever have the same boundary throughout your life. I think it'll change with circumstances, with you know um, the implications of your actions or what you'll do. So, thank you.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you sharing. And I agree with you. I think the boundaries change as we change, as we grow, as we maneuver through life. Does anybody else have anything to share? I intended to, so I know you want to know why I probably, or haven't, maybe you've forgotten, but I asked you to put in those 3 words at the beginning. And I meant to stop and take time because I like to make poetry from the words. And so I didn't get a chance to do that, but that was why I was asking you, because I usually take time, I usually try to find poetry in the words that we've come up with, but I didn't have time. I'm still working out the doing it in virtual spaces. It's easier for me to just jot it down on the thing when when I'm in face-to-face situations, but I get so carried away. I'm talking and it's chatting and then I forget. Anybody else?
Making coffee.
Anybody else have anything they want to share before we close out? Questions, comments? Thank you so much for being a wonderful audience today. I really, really appreciate your talking with me and sharing with me today and sharing your thoughts. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic. Yeah, your work is fabulous, and we're honored that you were able to be part of the showcase.
It was a blast. Thank you.
Well, we're right at our cocktail hour.